there, and welcome back to the Octagon3 Situation Room from the Ready to Talk TV and Podcast studio. Of course, we'll be bringing you very informative information and details as to how the elections in Edo State is unfolding. And it's been a really interesting time. I mean, I've been having so much fun engaging with people from different sectors and from different areas. And with me now is another analyst, and we'll be delving more into what has been going on in Edo State. It's almost, in fact, the whole day is almost gone, and we've gotten some level of information as to how the election has been unfolding. So I'm going to allow my guest introduce himself. But before then, of course, you know who I am. I am Chioma Oti, and it's such an honor to be anchoring this session again. So now to my guest, please introduce yourself.
Hello everyone. Hi Chioma, it's good to be here.
Great to have you.
My name is Victor Pius Imwe. I'm a lawyer. I work in HR. I've been in the development space for quite a bit as well. So human business development and, you know, non-profits, that whole range of work. And so it's a genuine pleasure to be here, especially as one who was part of the Octagon Situation Room 1. So it's great to be here for part 3.
Exactly. It's so great to have you here, and it's good to know that you've been with us a while ago, and then today you came in a bit earlier, and you've seen how things have been turning out here. We've been using our tech-enabled platform, which is the Follow the Result platform, to follow the results, and majorly we are observing and reporting with that platform. So far, from what you saw, before we go into your opinion, going by what you saw at the Situation Room here at our studio in Abuja, what would you say the result is looking like so far?
Well, the result so far it looks like a pretty close call between, as usual, the two heavyweights.
Yes.
In just about any election, more so in the north and in the south.
Yes.
Right. So it does seem like a pretty close call. Of course, as more results come in, I think as at the last check we were at 2,500 and something out of about 4,500. So. We're still awaiting more updates. We're still awaiting more results. But for right now, it seems pretty much like a two-horse race. Thankfully, cases of electoral violence have been greatly minimized, which is significantly relieving considering that a lot of us were quite concerned, given all of the narratives, given all of the tension politically, given all of really the national challenges that have plagued us building up right until this election. So it's a great relief to see that cases of electoral violence, ballot snatching, you know, rioting and all of that have been significantly minimized. So kudos to the great people of Edo State, kudos to the government, kudos to security agencies, and of course to all of the other stakeholders involved in managing the situation.
Exactly. Very interesting, and I'm very particularly interested in your choice of words. You said it's been greatly minimized because, I mean, we still have a few cases here and there of ballot box snatching and a couple other things. But I'm very curious to know something you said.
Yes.
You said it's a two-horse race, and I'm curious because, I mean, we have a third party that seems to be pulling so much weight. So why did you give that a blind eye?
Well, again, this takes us back really to the IREV, right? Which is again why so many of us were pretty, would I say, displeased or upset at, you know, the way things worked out with the IREV during the general elections. But we've been able, as of course your team has, to monitor the numbers at the back end via the IREV to see what's going on all the way down to wards and to polling units, really. So what the IREV has done is that it's given us that bit of a bird's eye view into what's going on, even though we can't all be there on the ground. And so why I say, coming back to your question, that it's a two-horse race is simply because as much as, of course, there is the media wave, as much as, of course, there is a certain popular sentiment, perhaps, at the end of the day, we must necessarily deal with the numbers on ground. And if what's on the IREV is anything to go by, even though that's another question altogether, but if what's currently there is anything to go by, then it is right now a two-horse race, primarily between the PDP and the APC.
Oh, well, I like the divergence in opinions because the guest we had here earlier said he thinks that's the Labour Party and that's from Mr. Olumide Akpata. It seems like he is actually pulling some weight considering that he is being backed by an aspirant or candidate of the Labour Party during the presidential election, Mr. Peter Obi. So it felt like that was going to cause some tension coming from three angles. But since you do not think that that is going to be significantly important, then we could just move on with the conversation. So I'm curious to know something about what you had said again earlier, which is about violence, because that's one thing that I think trails a lot of elections in Nigeria. And so we see that there isn't as much violence as some people had probably preconceived, because going by the fact that there was a kind of disagreement or discord in terms of signing the peace accord, that had already started giving ideas that there might be some level of hostility during the elections, but that doesn't really seem to be the case right now. Why do you think that is so? And do you think that that any violence will ensue before the end of the day?
Well, for one, as valuable as paper peace accords are,
yes,
it's more important that, you know, the quest for peace is observed in practice as opposed to just on paper, right? And so, even though, of course, we're not excited that the PDP candidate did not sign that peace accord, it is more important to us that on the day, right, at least as far as we can see, an adherence to the basic principles, right? So whether it was or it wasn't signed, at this point becomes a moot conversation. The most important fact is that there is, you know, more peace than there is violence. And that's really what matters to us at the end of, you know, today's events, right? And now, on the other hand, however, the downside of the conversation really is that there was a lot of voter apathy.
Yes.
Yeah, so as much as we're right to celebrate the current state of peace, even though, you know, in the non-profit space, we would call that more negative peace, but that's a different conversation.
Exactly.
It is what it is, right?
Yes.
But then it appears that voter apathy has contributed significantly to that, because it seems that more of the voting population on the day has come from the older demographic, many of whom are less inclined to be physically violent, many of whom are more inclined, you know, towards stability, towards let's just get this process done and dusted. It probably really doesn't matter who gets there, as long as, you know, we're safe, our communities are fine, we can all just still survive the next 4 to 8 years, right? So that in itself is another consideration. So do we really want situations where we can only celebrate peace when voter numbers are low? that then becomes a different question for
on its own. Exactly. I like the angle you come from, because it is funny that there is a very huge voter apathy in Edo State. I would have imagined that the voter turnout in Edo State would have been very massive, considering that the whole country has been clamoring for change and they've been complaining about the current state of the administration of the president and everything. And I'm curious to know why that is so, because I mean, everybody feels like youths are getting politically conscious. It feels like we're getting wiser. So why is there a lesser turnout of youth?
The answer to that question is as divergent, perhaps, as our cultures in themselves are. But if I may, you know, following elections from 1999 down, and in particular since I became more interested from, say, 2011, you know, downwards, we often find that more often than not, right? We often find that more often than not, several considerations beyond just the desire for social change tend to come into play, especially as the elections draw near. So you find that, for instance, in 2011, right, the conversation was not so much around the competency of the then President Jonathan. It was more around the fact that he was a minority president and there had never been one. In very simple terms, we've never had anybody from the Niger Delta be president, right? So it was a case of the underdog, really, right? And then you fast forward to 2015, and the narrative was changed. Oh, we've had 16 years of, you know, the APC and the PDP, and we can't do that anymore right now. We need the system to change. We need corruption to go out. We basically just need an overhaul of the entire system. And so you have the APC riding on that wave. And the problem many times is that as much as people clamor for change, it appears that many times we don't have the conversation around what our definition of change is. So for some people, the definition of change, for instance, is, oh, the candidate for the PDP is from a zone that has never been governor before.
Exactly.
And so that's the definition of change.
It's not realistic.
Exactly. Now, so you then have situations where people's definition of change is, oh, well, you know, we've had the PDP, we've had the APC, now we want somebody from a different system, let's try something different. But then, on the other hand, somebody says, yeah, well, the guy from the Labour Party that you say is change belongs to a tribe or an ethnic group in the state that has held power consistently. So your definition of change is not my definition of change,
Yes.
right? And so I feel like when we have these conversations around change, right, it's super important that we understand what our definitions of change really are. Otherwise, we'll have situations where election day comes and we're surprised when we really should not be, right? Because then again, we just assume we're all on the same page.
Yes.
And, you know, I'm looking at the numbers, and in all honesty, you would assume, like you said, that one would assume that, like you said, that, you know, given the economic state, there'd be more of a shift away from the establishment.
Much more people are
However, that tends to ignore the fact that we still operate a democracy in Nigeria where very often primordial and parochial sentiments can take precedence even over considerations of competence. So it can often be as simple as, this person is my brother. It often can still be as basic as, well, my tribe has never been in power, and now someone from my tribe is going, and so I'm going to support that guy. I don't know your person, I know my brother, you know. And so the question, again, really is, because there are often as many questions as there are answers in these scenarios, right, can be, at what point does Nigerian politics become more ideological than sentimental?
I'll still be very shocked and indeed awed to know that anybody in this time and age still goes by trivial and very flimsy reasons as, this person is from my place, this party has not ruled in a while, as compared to things like the person's competence, the person's track record, and every other thing that really matters. So I'll be really shocked. But well, we've talked a lot about that. So let's move now to the electoral umpire. And I don't know, but a lot of a few people that we've had on the program have said that their level of preparedness wasn't too good and all of that. But I'd like to know, from your assessment and from pre-election activities and the turnout of events, do you think INEC appears to have been as prepared as they had said they were prior to the elections?
At this point, majority has to carry the day. My answer would be a resounding no. And you see, it's worrisome, really, because, you know, the question then becomes not just one of competence, but one even also of intention. Is there a deliberate attempt? Are people being intentional about actually sabotaging our electoral process? Is it just a case of people, you know, being negligent, or is the negligence in itself intentional? Because there doesn't seem to be much of a justification, you know, for certain issues rising up again, for instance, with the technology, the IREV and the beavers, when we have had well over a year from the last elections, you know, to, in both business and non-business spaces, right? There's a very important phrase we call monitoring and evaluation. Yes. Right? And in such a sensitive, on such a sensitive subject as this, it means that the electoral body has the significant responsibility to constantly monitor and evaluate their execution. Right? We cannot in 2024 have the same excuses for poor elections as we had in 2011 or 2007, considering the significant investment that has gone in terms of budget increments, in terms of technology, in terms of manpower training, in terms even of electoral amendments. You know, it's gone as far as systemic changes designed towards facilitating more transparent elections. So if after all of that, and then after it's nearly 2 years, right?
Yes.
And nearly 2 years since the last elections, we still have a scenario where basic technology, because quite frankly, I mean, I'm looking at the IREV, and no offense, but well, it leaves a lot to be desired. So in terms of the functioning, if we're still almost 2 years down the line where we seem to have been before the 2023 general elections, then it calls a lot of people and processes into question. What are we really doing in terms of our preparation? What are we really doing in terms of our readiness? In terms of, software guys, for instance, do a lot of testing before eventual deployment. And it is presumed that the INEC ought to have done this. So, and testing is not just done in favorable circumstances. It's done under every kind of condition. What happens when it's really too sunny? What happens when it's really raining? What happens when there are network fluctuations? And there ought to be contingency plans for all of those possible fluctuations. Especially, again, considering how sensitive elections are. We're not talking about just a fintech product here. We're talking about the electoral system of an entire country. It doesn't matter whether it's a general election or it's an off-cycle election. The process, the quality, the QA standards, quality assurance standards must be the same. So if they're not, then there must be a lot of introspection. There must be a lot of evaluation after the elections are done.
That's very important, and I must say that you really raised a very important point, and that's to say that, and this is more or less like a tag-along question to all that you have just said, is that to say that the health of our political or election system in Nigeria has not grown in any way? Because you mentioned how the involvement or the incorporation of technology into the entire system hasn't significantly changed how our election has been run since 2007 and 2015 and like that. So is that to say that our problems are beyond technology, they are beyond incorporation of certain things? What do you think should be done really to make our electoral process much more transparent, smoother, and even more transparent?
I was having a conversation with a friend a few days back, and he said something that quite struck me. He said, we think that many of our challenges are administrative, whereas they are in fact cultural.
That sounds
and that statement got me thinking for a few minutes, and in reality it's true. We assume that a lot of our problems are administrative, which is why we're very quick to blame the government. In reality, however, many of our challenges, and it applies even during the elections, are as cultural as they are administrative. Because in reality, see, societal culture permeates the government and the governed, as a matter of fact. And so it's why it's not always a challenge of who's in there. It's a challenge of what is the culture, first of all. You see, because it's why we had reports, for instance, of people when the IREV seemed not to be, or the beavers rather, seemed not to be working, and they're surrounding INEC officials and saying, just upload manually. It's a culture thing, not an administration thing in that moment, because people just feel, well, we've been uploading manually anyway. So even though the regulations mandate the INEC to upload electronically, people just decide, well, why not just do it the old way? We've been doing it the old way. Why not just upload whatever? You see? So the question then is, first of all, how does our culture begin to change? How do we change? And it goes back to what we said before. How do we change our voting patterns first? How do we change our monitoring? Because who asks questions after elections are done?
Exactly. Post-mortem should be run.
Exactly. So it's like once the election figures are collated and announced, it now becomes the job of the parties to sort themselves out. So the ones that feel angry,
eyes on the judiciary.
Eyes on the judiciary, exactly. And so the parties that are angry go to the courts. The parties that decide, well, we never really had a chance, put out some nice sounding statements or work with the government, and that's it. But who actually monitors the elections after they're done? Who's checking the veracity of figures? Who's assessing the quality of the process? Who's holding INEC and government institutions surrounding the elections to account for the next election cycle?
Exactly. So because of this poor accountability system, I think that's the reason why we keep moving forward in terms of time, but then we're not making progress in terms of our applications of anything that happens in the previous elections. So I have a lot of questions I want to ask, but then we do not have so much time. I'm just going to ask a couple of questions more before we leave here. So we heard prior to the elections that there was a deployment of a huge number of military personnel to this state. And for me and a couple of the people, we know that it's not about the number of people that are deployed. What are they really doing? Because a lot of them go there and then they do not do what they actually paid to do there. So what do you think about that huge number of military people deployed to a state alone, and it's not a nationwide election?
I think again it's a culture thing because we forget that
Yeah,
first
we
of
go
all
back there.
in Nigeria, as far as our law is concerned, the military has no business with elections to begin with. The military is responsible strictly for the defense of our borders and to prevent insurrection. Now, unless you're telling me that there were clear intelligence reports indicating the likelihood of insurrection in Edo State,
Yeah.
I see no justification for the deployment of such of the military alone, let alone that number.
Yes.
Right? So on the one hand, you wonder, is there some intent to intimidate? Or is it just a case of, oh, well, there might be violence. So in Nigeria, since maybe the police is understaffed, under-empowered, because that's another consideration. Are we empowering those whose primary responsibility it is to maintain and preserve law and order, the police, to do their job? Because when we don't do that, then we come back to the issue of the police not being able to handle internal matters which fall squarely within their jurisdiction, and then we have to involve the military. So it's a two-headed dragon, really. On the one hand, we don't fund the police well enough to do their job, we don't train them enough, we don't build their culture well enough, right? And so we then have to fall back to the military that just seems like they have enough funding, they have enough equipment, so whatever happens, they're the go-to guys. But then it now becomes, again, a culture problem in Nigeria, really, that wrongly influences pretty much everything we do. Because even down to the average Nigerian that has any connection with the military, something goes wrong. And the first line of call is,
Exactly.
I have a brother in the military.
Yes.
And so it seems pretty much like that kind of escalates all the way even to government levels,
Yeah.
where the military now becomes, the guys we depend on, even for things as civilian as
Exactly.
elections.
So it seems like police is a more friend to other people instead of police being our friends. But that's on the lighter side. So I'm going to ask you one more question
Yes,
before we
please.
leave the studio now. I just want to know what your projections are, because different people have come and they've told us, I think this person is going to win, I think this other party is going to win, and all of that. So we have the APC, the PDP, and of course the Labour Party, even though you do not think that they are part of the racing horses, but I think they are. So I would like to know from your assessment as to what has been going on prior to the elections and today, seeing the unfolding of situations, who do you think would probably turn out to be the winner of this election?
The problem really with calling out election results is simple, right? At the end of the day, rightly or wrongly, democracy will always be a game of numbers,
Exactly.
right? And no, I'm not dismissing anyone as not being in the race. And when I speak of a two-horse race, again, it's an allusion more to the current numbers than to anything else. So from what the numbers seem to indicate, it's going to be a tight call between the two leading parties. Now, of course, as more results are uploaded via the IREV, we will then get to see a broader picture. So for me, it's not a question of opinion, it's more a question of the data. Because as much as I do have a candidate preference here, I'm not voting, right? So I don't get to determine what the actual numbers will turn out to be. We can only follow, and I'd strongly recommend that more people do this. I can only follow what's been uploaded on the IREF, for instance, whose purpose it is to enable the rest of us, those in the state, those outside, to follow the results, which is what, again, Ready to Lead Africa is doing at the moment, right? Following the results. I think that if more Nigerians were as conscious as RTLA is, we might be able to hold more of our people, our processes involved in elections accountable. So who's going to win? I'm going to keep my preferred candidate close to my chest.
Right.
However, I'd say follow the results, get the numbers right. If there are concerns about the veracity of the results, let people be sure to please collate instances and communicate with electoral observers like Ready to Lead. That's why they're there. Collate evidence. It's not, we've gone past the stage where all we can do is rant and rave. We should be at that stage now where people are gathering real-time evidence, right? Because at the end of the day, even though all eyes might still be on the judiciary after this, as is often the
Sadly.
case, it's important that we're also coming correct. He that comes to equity, as we say, must come with clean hands. So it's important that we're bringing our facts, our data, our evidence, right, into the conversation. If the matter has to go to the court, it should not go to the court on the basis of sentiment.
Yes.
It must go on the basis of cogent facts and evidence. So I'd recommend that people are as conscious about following the facts as they are about voicing opinions.
I totally agree with you. And just like he said, to every citizen out there in Edo State, ensure to follow the process. Do not just go with what they say, what this person says, and sentiments. I think it's your duty to really follow the process and keep up with it. It will keep changing because, I mean, the election is still ongoing. But I think we've come a long way. It's already almost end of day today.
Yeah.
So we should be looking forward to what the total results are saying. And it can give us an idea or a skeletal idea of what the results will be like. So thank you very much, I must say, Mr. Pius or Victor. Yes, Mr. Victor Pius. That was an absolutely amazing analysis. And it's great that you're a lawyer. And then we have two key people. I would call them key because, like I said, I have three people running in this election.
Yes.
So we have Mr. Akpata, who is also a legal practitioner, and then Mr. Asiwe. So we have quite a number of them. So that's it for now. It's been a great time, and we continue to inform you as things unfold. Also, keep yourself informed by reading up, following news, following up with anything that was going to keep you informed. My name again is Choma Oti, and that'll be it for now. I'll see you next time.
All right.